On today's Exploring History podcast, we'll discuss the question that's on everyone's mind, namely, what's gross about the domestic product?
Welcome to Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History.
When two business people run into each other, a common question is, how's business? The answer can depend on many factors. Harry Truman once said that a recession is when your neighbor loses his job, while a depression is when you lose your job. In other words, how things are going for you is the most important factor in your mind when you hear the question, how's business? Different businesses can have very different experiences, depending on what activity they are pursuing. For instance, during the COVID pandemic, companies that made face masks, medical-grade gloves, and plexiglass screens for checkout stands had a lot of business. On the other hand, airlines, cruise lines, concert venues, and in-home service companies often had a hard time making ends meet. Your perspective on how things are going will likely depend on what your personal experience has been. The news might say that the economy is doing great, but if the business where you or your dad has been working closes up, your immediate personal economic outlook will be pretty bleak. You quite possibly know people who are doing well and people who are barely getting by. But economic news involves more than just what is happening to you. How the overall economy is doing is a question that affects just about everyone. For instance, inflation, what we sometimes call the cost of living, affects the price of food, gasoline, and other purchases we all have to make all the time. Our primary interest, understandably, is in how we're doing personally, and then perhaps we want to know how our community is doing. We want to know how many people are being laid off or whether new businesses are hiring and doing well. But more broadly, many people want to know how the national economy is doing, beyond the individual experiences of people we know or hear about. Investors wanting to help a business get started, or someone wanting to open his or her own shop, want to know if now is the right time. Economists have developed several ways of measuring the economy to give an overall picture to help answer the question, how's business? To answer the question we asked in a silly way at the start of the podcast, the single most important and most comprehensive measure of the country's economy is the gross, or overall, domestic product, or GDP. This is the market value of a nation's total domestic output of all goods and services. The GDP measures consumer spending, spending by businesses, purchases by government, and net exports. Economists have defined the GDP to include several different aspects of the economy, but it doesn't include everything. The gross domestic product measures economic activity within a country. Even if a citizen of another country owns a business in this country, its sales are included in the total. The GDP does not include raw materials used to make other products. These items are assumed to be part of the purchase price of final products. The GDP does not include sales of used products. The sales of used products are significant in our country, but they do not say anything about the production of new goods. So buying a used car or having a garage sale does not show up in the GDP. Also, the GDP does not include Social Security payments. These payments, again, do not reflect any production, and it is assumed that this money will be included in consumer purchases. Most economists believe that a healthy average rate of growth for a nation's GDP is about 3% per year. A rate of growth at this level shows that people are being productive, and this level of activity creates goods and services by and for the population growth that occurs through new births and immigration. 3% might not sound like much, but a country that sustains this rate of growth will double its economic output in about 24 years. The United States has the largest GDP of any country in the world, for which we can thank our freedoms and our nation's productivity. So, the gross domestic product is the best single measurement of a nation's economy, but there are some aspects of a nation's economic activity that it does not show. For instance, the GDP does not reflect the status of individual industries or how wealth is distributed among the population. The GDP does not reflect the intangible things that are important to many people, such as families where the wife and mother works from home, or people caring for a sick or elderly relative, or citizens doing volunteer work. The GDP doesn't say anything directly about many quality of life issues, although a better quality of life usually leads to more productive activities. Another key indicator of the health of the overall economy is the rate of inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics in the U.S. Department of Labor maintains what it calls a market basket of goods and services that people commonly buy. The Bureau conducts surveys of what people are paying for these goods and services in several different cities around the country. This information results in what the Bureau calls the Consumer Price Index. If the overall price of this collection of goods and services is higher this month than last month, the Bureau will announce that inflation, or the cost of living, has risen by an annual rate of 5% or whatever it is. That's not 5% for 1 month. That would be an annual inflation rate of 60%, and we would all be in deep trouble if that were the case. The Federal Reserve has a goal of keeping inflation at an annual rate of 2% a year. Inflation has been well above that for the last 2 or 3 years, which is one reason why many people are having a difficult time right now. As with the GDP, the Consumer Price Index is a good indicator, but not a complete one. It does not include taxes. It does not do a good job of reflecting prices in rural areas. It is not quick to show changes in buying habits, as when people start buying more hamburger and less steak when times are hard. It is also slow in reflecting when new products come onto the market. A third key economic indicator is the rate of unemployment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys thousands of homes and tens of thousands of businesses to determine the percentage of the labor force that is out of a job and looking for work. The unemployment rate gives an estimate of what percentage of workforce Americans is actually working, which again is an indication of the health of the economy. But the unemployment rate has its limitations also. The survey does not reflect people who have given up looking for a job, or the percentage of people who are underemployed, working at a job for which they are overqualified or working fewer hours than they would like, or people who are working more than one job. An unemployment rate of about 3% is usually taken to mean there is full employment, that just about everyone who wants a job has one. The United States has maintained a fairly low rate of unemployment for several years, except for a spike at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. You might hear about other indicators of economic activity, such as new and existing home sales, which indicate how many people have the income to afford a house, and how the complex construction industry is doing. Another common indicator is the survey of consumer confidence. If people believe that times are hard, this will influence how they act in economic terms. Finally, we'll look at one more common indicator of economic activity, and that is the stock market. When you want to buy vegetables, you go to a vegetable market. When you want to buy shares of stock in major companies, you go to a stock market. The New York Stock Exchange is the largest stock market or stock exchange in the world. It traces its origin to business dealings conducted on Wall Street in 1792. The stock exchange is still located on Wall Street. The classic image of the stock exchange involves hundreds of stockbrokers and errand boys running around the stock market floor, shouting buy and sell orders, with piles of paper mounting up and stock ticker tape spitting out reports of changes in stock prices. Today's trading floor is not as frenzied as it used to be, since computerized electronic trading has become the order of the day. The New York Stock Exchange is owned by a private company based in Atlanta, Georgia, that owns stock exchanges in several cities around the world. The shares of stock for over 2,300 companies are bought and sold on the New York Stock Exchange. Their prices rise and fall depending on demand for those companies, economic developments, and world news. An old Wall Street saying holds that the two biggest motivations for buying and selling stock are greed and fear. Historically, the overall value of the stocks bought and sold on the New York Stock Exchange has grown by an average of 10% per year, which is a compliment to the American economy. Some people try to play the stock market and anticipate what stocks will rise in value and which ones will fall, but wise investors keep their investments for several years in mutual funds that invest in several companies through accounts managed by professional stockbrokers. Retirement accounts, such as IRAs, individual retirement accounts, have made a huge difference in the growth of stock values over the last several decades, as more and more people have invested in mutual funds. In 1896, Charles Dow, editor of the Wall Street Journal at the time, and stockbroker Edward D. Jones created the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Often called the Dow Jones or just the Dow, the average takes the value of 30 key companies out of the 2,300 traded on the New York Stock Exchange and uses a formula to determine the total value of those stocks. The Dow uses the cumulative value of these stocks to determine how the overall stock market is performing. The Dow can rise and fall dramatically during the day, but the key indicator is its daily closing. The Dow began in 1896 with a value of 40.94. In 1972, the Dow closed over 1,000 for the first time. In 1999, it closed over 10,000 for the first time. On the day I wrote the script for this podcast, the Dow closed at 34,614.76. The company that owns the Dow periodically changes the businesses it includes in the 30 to reflect the changing economy and changing demand for specific stocks. Companies go out of business, and new companies sometimes catch on like wildfire. The Standard & Poor 500, the S&P 500, is the second most widely followed stock index. In 1860, H.V. Poor published his first reference book with information about railroad companies. In 1906, the Standard Statistics Bureau began publishing information about businesses other than railroads. Standard & Poor, now a part of McGraw-Hill Publishing Company, produces materials that provide financial research and analysis. The S&P 500 tracks the value of 500 large companies that are listed on either the New York Stock Exchange or on NASDAQ. Which brings us to NASDAQ, the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations. It was founded in 1971 and is also headquartered in New York City. It is the second largest stock exchange in the U.S. and lists a large number of technology companies. Investors can also choose commodity exchanges where grain, livestock, oil, and other products or commodities are traded. We hear a lot about the stock market, and it seems to be the most commonly cited barometer of how the economy is doing. The news often reports the daily changes in the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ. These numbers are fairly good indicators of how America's large companies are doing, and of course those companies have a big impact on the overall economy. These are the numbers that investors want to know, since they will likely influence where people invest their money. But they don't tell the whole story. The monthly, quarterly, and annual trends reported by government surveys give a broader and more accurate picture of the overall economy. And the major stock market reports don't say much about what is happening with small businesses and with self-employed people who make up a large part of the economy. Middle income and poor people are more numerous than investors, and even though they don't invest in stocks and mutual funds, what is happening with them matters also. I hope this brief survey will help you make more sense of the often dizzying and confusing numbers you hear in the news. And really, there's nothing gross about any of it. We do need to remember what Jesus said to seek first, God's kingdom and His righteousness. If we do that, He'll take care of everything else. I'm Ray Notgrass. Thank you for exploring how we understand the economy today.
This has been Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast app, and please leave a rating and review so that we can reach more people with our episodes. If you want to learn about new homeschool resources and opportunities from Notgrass History, you can sign up for our email newsletter at exploringhistorypodcast.com. This program was produced by me, Titus Anderson. Thanks for listening.